The doctors told her mother the news when she was only 2 years old. The little girl would never hear. Not music, not laughter, not even her own mother's voice calling her name. In that small clinic, with its peeling walls and flickering lights, her mother held her daughter close and cried. She cried for all the things her child would never experience. She cried for the silence that would follow this girl for the rest of her life. They lived in a tiny apartment on the 4th floor of an old building. The elevator had been broken for years, so her mother carried groceries up those stairs every evening after working 12-hour shifts at a garment factory. The father had left when the girl was still a baby. He couldn't handle it, people said. He couldn't accept that his daughter was different. So one morning he packed a bag and walked out the door, and neither of them ever saw him again. Growing up deaf in a world full of sound is lonelier than most people can imagine. The girl learned to read lips by the time she was 4. She learned to watch people's faces carefully, to notice how their mouths moved, how their expressions changed. She became an expert at understanding what people meant even when she couldn't hear what they said. But understanding and belonging are two very different things. At school, the other children didn't know what to make of her. She was the quiet one, the strange one, the girl who never answered when you called her name. Some kids tried to be kind. They would wave at her or smile, but most of them eventually gave up trying to include her. It was too hard to communicate. It was too awkward. So they played their games and told their jokes, and she sat alone on the bench, watching the world move around her in silence. Her mother did everything she could. She worked extra shifts to pay for special classes. She learned sign language and taught it to her daughter. She filled their small apartment with picture books and puzzles and anything that might help her child learn and grow. But money was always tight, and time was always short, and some nights her mother would fall asleep at the kitchen table, still wearing her factory uniform, too exhausted to even make it to bed. The girl never complained. Even at 7 years old, she understood that her mother was fighting a battle every single day just to keep them afloat. She understood that life had not been fair to either of them. So she stayed quiet and tried to be good and never asked for things she knew they couldn't afford. One afternoon in early autumn, her mother had to work a double shift. A neighbor was supposed to watch the girl, but the neighbor got called away for an emergency. So the girl found herself alone with nothing to do and nowhere to go. She wandered out of the apartment building and started walking down the street, not really sure where she was headed. That's when she saw the community center. It was an old brick building with large windows and a faded sign above the door. The girl had passed it many times but had never gone inside. Today, something pulled her toward it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was something else entirely, something she couldn't name or explain. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The main room was large and mostly empty. There were a few plastic chairs stacked against one wall and some posters about health and nutrition taped to another. The paint was chipping in the corners and the floor tiles were cracked in places. But there was warmth here, too. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making patterns on the floor. The air smelled like old books and lemon cleaning spray. And there, in the far corner of the room, sat a piano. It was an upright piano, old and worn with scratches on its wooden surface and keys that had turned yellow with age. Someone had pushed it against the wall, almost like they were trying to hide it, to forget about it. A thin layer of dust covered the top. The girl walked toward it slowly as if approaching a sleeping animal. She had seen pianos before, in pictures and in movies. She knew that people pressed the keys and music came out. But she had never touched one. She had never been close enough to feel its presence. She stood in front of it for a long moment, just looking. Then, very carefully, she reached out and pressed a single key. She felt nothing in her ears. Of course she didn't. But something happened that she didn't expect. A vibration traveled through her fingertip, up through her hand, along her arm, and settled somewhere deep in her chest. It was like a tiny heartbeat. It was like a whisper she could feel instead of hear. It was alive. Her eyes went wide. She pressed another key, another vibration, different from the first, higher, lighter, like a bird taking flight. She pressed a lower key and felt something heavier, something that rumbled like distant thunder rolling across the sky. For the next several minutes, she pressed key after key, feeling each vibration, learning how they were different, how they were the same. She forgot where she was. She forgot that she was alone. She forgot everything except the feeling of those keys beneath her fingers and the sensations traveling through her body. She didn't notice the old woman watching her from the doorway. The woman's name was Mrs. Antonova, and she had run this community center for over 30 years. She had seen many children come and go through these doors. She had seen happy children and sad children, loud children and quiet children. But she had never seen anything quite like this. She watched the deaf girl press the piano keys with such focus, such wonder, such pure joy. She watched her close her eyes and feel the vibrations. She watched her small face transform from sadness to something beautiful, something almost like peace. Mrs. Antonova didn't interrupt her. She simply stood there, a gentle smile on her wrinkled face, letting the girl have her moment. When the girl finally looked up and saw her, she jumped back from the piano, startled and afraid. She thought she was in trouble. She thought she would be told to leave. But Mrs. Antonova did something unexpected. She walked over slowly, making sure the girl could see her coming. She knelt down so they were at the same level, and she smiled. Then she did something even more surprising. She pulled a small chair over to the piano and sat down next to the girl. She took the girl's hand very gently and placed it flat against the wooden side of the piano. Then she played a chord. The girl gasped. She could feel the whole piano vibrating against her palm. It wasn't just the keys anymore. It was the entire instrument coming alive, singing through the wood, speaking in a language that didn't need sound. Mrs. Antonova played a simple melody, and the girl felt every note travel through the piano and into her body. She felt the highs and the lows, the fast parts and the slow parts. She felt the music. Tears streamed down the girl's face, but she was smiling. Mrs. Antonova looked at her with kind eyes that seemed to understand everything without a single word being spoken. She pointed to the piano, then to the girl, then made a gesture with her hands that meant, "Yours." The girl didn't understand at first, but Mrs. Antonova nodded encouragingly and patted the piano bench, inviting her to sit. From that day forward, the piano in the corner of the community center was no longer forgotten. It had found someone who needed it, and she had found something that would change her life forever. She couldn't hear the music, but for the first time in her 7 years of life, she could feel it. And that was more than enough. That evening, when her mother finally came home from work, exhausted and worried about having left her daughter alone, she found the girl sitting at the kitchen table with a strange expression on her face. It was happiness. Pure, unmistakable happiness. Her mother asked her what happened, signing the words with tired hands. The girl signed back just 2 words. "I found something." She didn't know how to explain it yet. She didn't have the words for what she had experienced. But somewhere deep inside her, in that place where the vibrations had settled, she knew that her life would never be the same. The silent girl had found her voice. She just didn't know it yet. Every day after school, she ran to the community center. Rain or shine, hot or cold, nothing could keep her away from that old piano in the corner. Mrs. Antonova would unlock the door for her and let her stay until evening, never asking for anything in return. The old woman seemed to understand that something important was happening, even if she couldn't quite explain what it was. The girl had no teacher. Her mother couldn't afford piano lessons, and even if she could, most teachers wouldn't know how to work with a deaf student, so the girl taught herself. Day after day, week after week, she sat at that piano and figured things out on her own. She started by memorizing the keyboard. She learned that there were white keys and black keys, and they repeated in the same pattern over and over. She learned that the keys on the left made deep vibrations that she could feel in her stomach, while the keys on the right made lighter vibrations that tickled her fingertips. She gave each key its own personality in her mind. The lowest keys were like giants walking slowly. The highest keys were like tiny birds fluttering their wings. At first, she just pressed random keys and felt what happened, but soon that wasn't enough. She wanted to understand how real music worked. She wanted to know the secrets that made people close their eyes and sway when they listened to a beautiful song. So she went to the library. The local library was small and old, but it had a music section tucked away in the back corner. The girl spent hours there, pulling books off the shelves and studying them page by page. She found books about music theory, about scales and chords and harmony. Most of it was confusing at first. The words were complicated, and the explanations assumed you could hear what they were describing. But she didn't give up. She copied diagrams into a notebook she had bought with money she saved from skipping lunch at school. She drew pictures of keyboards and labeled each key. She created her own system for understanding music, one that was based on patterns and vibrations instead of sounds. She discovered that music followed rules, just like math. Certain notes sounded good together because they vibrated at similar speeds. Other notes created tension because their vibrations clashed. Once she understood this, everything started to make sense. Music wasn't random. It was a language, and like any language, it could be learned. The library also had something else that changed everything for her. In the corner of the reference section, there was an old computer with internet access. The girl started using it to watch videos of pianists performing. She couldn't hear what they were playing, but she could see their hands. She could watch how their fingers moved across the keys, which keys they pressed, how fast or slow they played. She would watch the same video over and over, pausing it frame by frame, studying every tiny movement. Then she would go back to the community center and try to copy what she had seen. It was slow and frustrating. Her fingers wouldn't move the way she wanted them to. Her hands got tired and cramped. Sometimes she made mistakes so bad that even she could feel the vibrations were wrong, clashing against each other in ugly ways. But she kept going. Every mistake taught her something. Every failure brought her closer to understanding. By the time she was 10 years old, she could play simple songs from memory, nursery rhymes, folk tunes, simple classical pieces that beginners learn in their first year of lessons. For most people, this wouldn't seem like much, but for a deaf girl with no teacher and no money, it was a miracle. By 12, something remarkable started to happen. She moved beyond simple songs and began learning pieces that most students don't attempt until they've had years of professional training. She learned Chopin, the Polish composer who wrote music so beautiful that people said it could make angels cry. She learned his nocturnes, those dreamy nighttime pieces full of emotion and longing. She couldn't hear them the way others did, but she could feel them. She felt the sadness in the minor chords, the hope in the rising melodies, the peace in the quiet endings. She felt Chopin's heart through the vibrations in the wood and wire and ivory. Her mother noticed the change in her daughter. The girl who had once been so withdrawn, so sad, so lost in her silent world, now had a light in her eyes. She would come home from the community center with her fingers aching and her face glowing. She would sit at the kitchen table and move her fingers against the wood, practicing pieces in her mind even when she couldn't be at the piano. Her mother didn't fully understand what was happening, but she supported it in every way she could. She worked extra shifts so her daughter could have a small keyboard at home, a cheap electric one that barely worked but was better than nothing. She made sure there was always food on the table so her daughter had the energy to practice. She never complained about the long hours or the tired bones. By 14, The girl had memorized Bach's entire well-tempered clavier. This is a collection of pieces so complex and so demanding that professional pianists spend years studying it. Some never master it at all. But she had taught herself to play every single piece, feeling her way through the complicated patterns, understanding the mathematical beauty that Bach had woven into his music 200 years before she was born. She played only when the community center was empty, early in the morning before anyone arrived, or late in the evening after everyone had gone home. Mrs. Antonova always made sure she had access, leaving a key hidden in a special spot that only the two of them knew about. The girl was afraid to play when others were around. She worried about what they would think. A deaf girl playing piano? It seemed ridiculous, even to her sometimes. She imagined people laughing at her, making fun of her, telling her she had no right to touch an instrument she couldn't even hear. So she kept her gift a secret. For years, the only people who knew were her mother and Mrs. Antonova, and neither of them truly understood how far she had come. One winter evening, everything changed. She was playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She had chosen this piece for a special reason. Beethoven himself had been deaf when he composed some of his greatest works. He understood what it meant to create music in silence. He understood what it meant to feel what others could only hear. The first movement of the Moonlight Sonata is slow and sad, like moonlight reflecting on still water. The girl played it with her eyes closed, feeling every note travel through the piano and into her heart. She was so lost in the music that she forgot where she was. She forgot that the door was unlocked. She forgot that anyone could walk in. A man stood in the doorway watching her. He had come to the community center for a simple reason. He wanted to donate some old sheet music to give away the last pieces of a life he thought was over. He was a former concert pianist, once famous, once celebrated, now forgotten. A stroke had taken the use of his right hand years ago, and with it, his ability to play. He had spent years in bitterness and regret, mourning the career he had lost. But when he heard the music coming from inside the community center, he stopped. When he stepped through the door and saw the young girl at the piano, he froze. He watched her play Beethoven with a depth of feeling that he had rarely seen in his decades of performing and teaching. Tears began to fall down his weathered face. He didn't wipe them away. He just stood there, listening, watching, feeling something awaken inside him that he thought had died long ago. When the girl finished the piece, she opened her eyes and saw him standing there. She jumped up from the bench, terrified. Her secret was out. Someone had seen her. Someone had heard her. She expected him to laugh. She expected him to say something cruel. She expected him to confirm all the fears that had kept her hidden for so long. But the man didn't laugh. He didn't mock her. Instead, he did something she never expected. He placed his good hand over his heart, and he bowed to her. A deep, respectful bow, the kind that one artist gives to another. And in that moment, standing in that dusty community center with tears on both their faces, two broken people found each other. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives were about to change forever. The girl wanted to run. Every part of her body told her to escape, to flee from this stranger who had witnessed her deepest secret. But her legs wouldn't move. She stood frozen beside the piano bench, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The man took a slow step forward, then stopped. He seemed to understand that she was afraid. He held up his hands gently, the way you might approach a frightened animal, showing her he meant no harm. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad and a pen. He wrote something down, then turned the notepad around so she could read it. That was the most beautiful Beethoven I have heard in 20 years. She stared at the words, not quite believing them. She looked up at his face, searching for signs that he was joking or mocking her. But his eyes were serious. They were kind, and they were still wet with tears. He wrote again, "I am a pianist, or I was before this happened." He held up his right hand, and she noticed for the first time that it was different. The fingers were curled slightly inward, stiff and unmoving. He couldn't control them anymore. "A stroke," he wrote. "3 years ago. I haven't played since." The girl didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. So she just stood there, reading his words, trying to make sense of what was happening. He wrote one more thing on the notepad. "How long have you been deaf?" She held up all her fingers, then flashed them again. Her whole life. Since birth. The man closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had changed in his expression. It was wonder. It was disbelief. It was respect. He wrote quickly now, his handwriting getting messier with excitement. "You taught yourself? No teacher, no lessons?" She nodded. He shook his head slowly, like he was witnessing something impossible. Then he wrote the words that would change everything. "I would like to teach you, if you will let me." The girl's mother was not easy to convince. When her daughter came home that night and explained what had happened, her mother's first reaction was fear. A strange man approaching her teenage daughter, offering free lessons? It sounded dangerous. It sounded like a trick. But the girl begged her mother to at least meet him. She had never asked for anything like this before. She had never pushed back against her mother's decisions. But this was different. This mattered more than anything had ever mattered. So her mother agreed to one meeting. Just one. They met at the community center the following Saturday. Mrs. Antonova was there too, acting as a kind of guardian angel, watching over everything with her sharp old eyes. The man arrived wearing a neat but worn suit, carrying a folder full of papers. He explained his story through written notes and gestures. He had been a concert pianist for over 30 years. He had performed in great halls across the country. He had trained at the finest conservatory and studied under masters whose names were known around the world. Then the stroke came and took everything from him. He had spent the last 3 years in darkness. He had lost his purpose. He had lost his reason for living. Music had been his entire world, and without it, he didn't know who he was anymore. Then he heard the girl playing Beethoven, and something inside him woke up. He opened the folder and showed them newspaper clippings from his performing days, reviews that called him brilliant, photos of him on stage in concert halls, programs from performances he had given. He wasn't lying about who he was. He wasn't making it up. The girl's mother studied everything carefully. She asked questions through written notes. Why would he teach for free? What did he want in return? What were his intentions? His answers were simple and honest. He wanted to teach because he had found something rare, something precious. The girl had a gift that he had only seen a handful of times in his entire career. She had taught herself things that took most students a decade to learn, but she was also making mistakes, developing bad habits, missing important foundations that would limit her growth. He could help her. He could give her the knowledge and guidance that she deserved, and in doing so, maybe he could find a reason to keep living. Maybe he could still be useful. Maybe music didn't have to be completely over for him after all. The girl's mother looked at Mrs. Antonova. The old woman nodded slowly. She had been watching this girl for years. She had seen the dedication, the passion, the hunger to learn. If anyone deserved this chance, it was her. Finally, the mother agreed. But she had conditions. All lessons would happen at the community center, where Mrs. Antonova could supervise. She would be informed of every session. And if anything seemed wrong, anything at all, it would end immediately. The man agreed to everything without hesitation. He understood her concerns. He respected them. He was just grateful for the opportunity. And so the lessons began. 3 times a week, the man came to the community center and taught the girl everything he knew. He taught her proper technique, how to position her hands and arms to avoid strain and injury. He taught her music theory in depth, explaining the rules and patterns that governed every piece ever written. He taught her the history of the great composers, their lives and struggles and triumphs, the stories behind their most famous works. But most importantly, he taught her how to feel music even more deeply than she already did. He showed her how to press her entire body against the piano, feeling the vibrations not just through her fingers, but through her chest, her stomach, her legs. He taught her to feel the music through the floor by taking off her shoes and pressing her bare feet against the wooden boards. He taught her to sense the subtle changes in air pressure when certain notes were played, the way the room itself seemed to breathe with the music. He had spent his whole life hearing music, but working with her, he learned to feel it in ways he never had before. She taught him just as much as he taught her. The months passed, and the girl transformed. Her technique became cleaner, more precise, more powerful. Her understanding deepened. She learned to interpret pieces in new ways, to bring out emotions and meanings that she had never noticed before. But something else changed, too. She started to believe in herself. For so long, she had hidden her gift out of shame and fear. She had believed that a deaf girl had no right to make music. She had believed that people would laugh at her, reject her, tell her she was foolish for even trying. The man showed her how wrong she was. He told her about Beethoven, who composed his greatest symphonies after losing his hearing completely. He told her about other musicians throughout history who had overcome impossible obstacles. He told her that her deafness wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. "You don't hear music the way everyone else does," he wrote to her one day. "You feel it in its purest form. You understand it in ways that hearing people never will. That is your gift. That is what makes you extraordinary." 3 years passed. The girl was now 17, on the edge of adulthood, her skills sharper than ever. The man had given her everything he had. All his knowledge, all his experience, all his wisdom. One evening, after a particularly intense practice session, he asked her to sit down. His face was serious. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote on his notepad. "There is a competition," he wrote, "the National Conservatory Competition. It is the most important event for young pianists in this country. It launches careers. It makes legends." The girl read the words with growing unease. She knew where this was going. "I have submitted a video of you playing. They have invited you to audition." Her heart stopped. Her hands went cold. She shook her head violently. No, she wasn't ready. She couldn't perform in front of strangers. She couldn't compete against students who had been training their whole lives with the best teachers money could buy. But the man took her hands gently in his one good hand. He looked into her eyes with a fierce intensity. "You are ready," he wrote. "You have always been ready. The only thing holding you back is fear, and fear is a liar." He paused, then wrote one more line. "It is time for the world to hear what I have heard. It is time for them to feel what you feel. It is time." The girl looked at the notepad, then at the man who had become like a father to her, then at the old piano that had started everything. She was terrified. But somewhere beneath the fear, a small flame of hope began to burn. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was printed on thick cream-colored paper with an official seal at the top. The girl's hands shook as she read the words. She had been accepted to audition at the National Conservatory Competition. The audition would take place in 6 weeks in the capital city, 300 miles away. 6 weeks. It felt like 6 minutes. It felt like no time at all. The days that followed were filled with panic and preparation. The girl practiced until her fingers ached and her back screamed for rest. She played the same pieces over and over, trying to make them perfect, trying to eliminate every tiny mistake. Her mentor sat beside her through every session, guiding her, encouraging her, pushing her to dig deeper than she ever had before. But perfection is a cruel goal. The more she practiced, the more mistakes she seemed to find. A note slightly off rhythm here. A transition not quite smooth enough there. She started to doubt herself. She started to wonder if she had been foolish to agree to this. One night she broke down crying at the piano. Her mentor found her slumped over the keys, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs. He sat down beside her and waited patiently until she looked up at him. He wrote on his notepad slowly, choosing his words with care. Music is not about being perfect. It is about being honest. When you play, you are telling your story, your struggle, your pain, your hope. That is what people will feel. That is what will move them, not perfection, truth. She read the words 3 times. Something shifted inside her. She had been so focused on not making mistakes that she had forgotten why she played in the first place. She played because music was the only way she could express what lived inside her. She played because it was the only time she didn't feel broken or different or alone. From that night on, she stopped chasing perfection. She started chasing truth instead. The problem of money hung over everything like a dark cloud. The audition was 300 miles away. They would need train tickets, a place to stay, food, and proper clothes. The girl's mother had saved a little over the years, but it wasn't nearly enough. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Antonova organized a bake sale at the community center. She told everyone in the neighborhood about the deaf girl who had taught herself piano, who had been invited to compete at the national level. People came from blocks away to buy cookies and cakes and pies. They came because they wanted to help. They came because they believed in her. The girl's mother sold her wedding ring. It was the last thing she had from her marriage, a small gold band with a tiny diamond. She had kept it all these years, not out of love for the man who left, but as a reminder of the dreams she once had. Now she traded those old dreams for her daughter's new ones. The mentor used his savings to buy the train tickets. He had been living simply since his stroke, his concert earnings long gone, surviving on a small pension. But he gave what he had without hesitation. He told the girl it was an investment in the future of music itself. When the day finally came to leave, the girl stood at the train station with her mother and her mentor. Mrs. Antonova had come to see them off, along with a small crowd of neighbors who had contributed to the bake sale. They waved and cheered as the train pulled away, their faces full of hope and pride. The girl watched them disappear through the window and felt the weight of their belief pressing down on her shoulders. So many people were counting on her. So many people had sacrificed for this moment. What if she let them all down? The capital city was overwhelming. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky. Crowds of people rushed in every direction. Cars and buses filled the streets with movement and chaos. The girl had never seen anything like it. She felt small and lost and completely out of place. The audition was held in a grand concert hall with velvet seats and crystal chandeliers. The girl had never been inside such a beautiful building. She had never seen a piano so magnificent, a gleaming black grand piano that sat on the stage like a throne. The other competitors arrived in expensive clothes with expensive instruments. They came with parents who drove luxury cars and teachers whose names were famous in musical circles. They talked confidently about their training, their performances, their expectations of victory. The girl sat alone in the corner of the waiting room, wearing a simple dress her mother had sewn by hand. She watched the other competitors warm up, their fingers flying across practice keyboards with casual ease. They looked like they belonged here. She felt like an intruder. One of the other competitors noticed her sitting alone. a boy about her age with slicked-back hair and a designer suit. He walked over and said something to her. She couldn't read his lips clearly, but she caught enough to understand. He was asking about her teacher, her training, her background. She pointed to her ear and shook her head, indicating that she couldn't hear. The boy's expression changed. His eyebrows rose. He said something to another competitor nearby, and they both laughed. The girl's face burned with shame. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run out of this place and never come back. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. Her mentor stood behind her, his eyes hard as he stared at the boys who had laughed. They quickly looked away and pretended to be busy with something else. Her mentor knelt down beside her and wrote on his notepad, "They are afraid of you. That is why they laugh. They have heard the rumors about the deaf girl who plays like an angel. They know you are a threat." She wasn't sure she believed him, but his words gave her enough strength to stay. When her name was called, everything went silent in her mind. She walked onto the stage and felt the eyes of the judges on her. There were 5 of them, sitting at a long table with serious expressions and blank notepads. Behind them, the auditorium was mostly empty, but a few people sat scattered in the seats. Other competitors, teachers, parents. She sat down at the grand piano and placed her hands on the keys. The instrument was unlike anything she had ever played. It was responsive and powerful, alive beneath her fingers in a way the old upright at the community center had never been. She had chosen to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was a risky choice. The piece was massive and demanding, full of emotional peaks and valleys that could overwhelm even experienced performers. Her mentor had questioned her decision, worried it was too ambitious. But she had insisted. This piece spoke to her like no other. It was about struggle and triumph. It was about darkness giving way to light. It was her story, written in notes and chords by a composer who had lived 100 years before her. She closed her eyes. She pressed her palms flat against the keys for a moment. Feeling the piano's heartbeat, connecting with it the way she had connected with that old upright so many years ago. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft and searching, like someone walking through fog, trying to find their way. She felt the vibrations travel through her fingers, up her arms, into her chest. She let the music guide her, let it carry her away from the bright lights and watching eyes. She forgot about the judges. She forgot about the other competitors. She forgot about everyone who had ever doubted her. Everyone who had ever laughed, everyone who had ever made her feel like she didn't belong. She played for her mother, who had worked so hard for so long. She played for her mentor, who had given her the tools to unlock her gift. She played for Mrs. Antonova and the neighbors who had believed in her. She played for every deaf child who had ever been told they couldn't do something. Most of all, she played for herself. For the little girl who had wandered into a community center and touched a piano for the first time. For the silent child who had found her voice in vibrations and patterns and feelings too deep for words. When she played the final chord, she kept her eyes closed for a long moment. The vibrations faded slowly, like the last light of sunset disappearing below the horizon. Then she opened her eyes. The judges were staring at her. Their notepads sat untouched. Their pens hung frozen in their hands. One of them, an older woman with silver hair, had tears streaming down her face. And then, from somewhere in the auditorium, someone began to clap. Then another person, then another. The girl turned and saw the entire room rising to their feet. Even the boy who had laughed at her was standing, his face pale with shock. She looked at the judges' table. The woman with silver hair was still crying, but she was also smiling. And in that moment, the girl knew. She had done it. She had told her truth, and the world had listened. The results were announced 3 days later. The girl was sitting in their small hotel room with her mother and her mentor when the phone buzzed with an email notification. Her mother read it first. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled from her eyes before she could even speak. The girl had won. Not second place, not third, first place. Unanimous decision from all 5 judges. The news spread quickly. By the next morning, reporters were calling. Newspapers wanted interviews. Television stations wanted to film her story. The deaf girl who had taught herself piano in a forgotten community center had captured the attention of the entire country. Headlines appeared everywhere. Silent prodigy stuns national competition. The girl who feels music. From community center to concert hall. Her face was on the front page of newspapers she had never heard of. Her story was shared thousands of times on social media by people she would never meet. Record labels called with offers. Concert halls sent invitations. Music schools that had never even known she existed now wanted to give her full scholarships. The world that had once seemed so closed to her was suddenly throwing open every door. It was overwhelming. The girl who had spent her life in the shadows was now standing in a spotlight so bright she could barely see. She didn't know how to handle the attention. She didn't know how to answer the questions reporters asked. She didn't know how to be the person everyone suddenly expected her to be. Her mentor helped her navigate those early days. He screened the calls and reviewed the offers. He protected her from people who wanted to exploit her story and guided her toward opportunities that would actually help her grow. He had been famous once. He knew how quickly the world could build you up and tear you down. In the months that followed, the girl performed at concert halls across the country. She played for audiences of hundreds, then thousands. She recorded an album that climbed the classical music charts. Critics wrote glowing reviews, calling her interpretation profound and emotionally transcendent. They said she played with a depth of feeling that most musicians never achieve in a lifetime. But through all of it, something nagged at her. A feeling she couldn't shake. A question she couldn't answer. What was all of this for? She had spent her whole life dreaming of being heard. Now the whole world was listening. But the fame felt empty somehow. The applause faded as soon as it ended. The interviews blurred together. The hotel rooms all looked the same. She was living a life that millions of people would envy, and yet she felt more lost than ever. One evening, after a concert in a city far from home, she sat alone in her dressing room. Her mother had gone back to the hotel to rest. Her mentor was meeting with promoters about future performances. She was surrounded by flowers and congratulations cards from people she didn't know. She looked at herself in the mirror. The girl staring back wore an expensive dress and professional makeup. She looked polished and successful, but her eyes were tired, her smile was forced. She didn't recognize herself anymore. She thought about the community center, the old piano with its yellowed keys, the dust floating in the afternoon sunlight, Mrs. Antonova's kind smile, the feeling of pressing her hands against the wood and discovering a world she never knew existed. That was when music had meant something. That was when playing had felt like breathing. Now it felt like performing, like pretending, like giving pieces of herself away to strangers who would never know her real story. She made a decision that night. A decision that shocked everyone around her. She was going home. Her mentor didn't understand at first. Her mother worried she was throwing away everything she had worked for. The record label warned her that disappearing now could end her career before it truly began. But the girl was certain. She had been given a gift. Not just the gift of music, but the gift of a second chance at life, and she knew exactly what she wanted to do with it. She returned to her small city. She went back to the community center where everything had started. Mrs. Antonova was still there, older now, moving a little slower, but with the same kind eyes and warm smile. The girl told her what she wanted to do. She wanted to reopen the music program that had been shut down years ago due to lack of funding. She wanted to teach children who had been told they couldn't learn, deaf children, children with disabilities, children from poor families who could never afford lessons, children who had been overlooked and forgotten, just like she had been. Mrs. Antonova cried when she heard the plan. She had dreamed of something like this for years, but never had the resources to make it happen. Now, with the money from the girls' performances and recordings, it was finally possible. They transformed the community center together. They brought in more pianos, including a beautiful grand piano donated by one of the concert halls where the girl had performed. They set up practice rooms and a small recording studio. They created scholarships for students who couldn't pay. The girl became a teacher. She taught the way her mentor had taught her, adapting everything for students who learned differently than most. She showed deaf children how to feel music through vibrations. She helped children with autism find patterns and structure in melodies. She encouraged children who had been told they were too poor or too different or too broken to ever make something beautiful. Word spread about the program. Families traveled from other cities to enroll their children. News stations came back, but this time they weren't just interested in her story. They wanted to see what she was building. They wanted to meet the children whose lives she was changing. Her mentor came to visit often. His health had declined over the years, and he walked with a cane now, his movements slow and careful. But his eyes still sparkled when he watched her teach. He sat in the front row of every student recital, just like he had once sat in the front row of her own performances. One afternoon, after a recital where a young boy with autism had played his first complete piece, her mentor took her hand. His grip was weak, but his gaze was strong. He didn't write anything on his notepad this time. He didn't need to. She could read everything in his eyes: pride, gratitude, love, and something else: peace. He passed away that winter quietly in his sleep. The girl was heartbroken, but she didn't stop teaching. She couldn't. He had given her everything he had, and the best way to honor him was to keep giving it away. Years passed. The girl became a woman. Her students grew up and went out into the world, carrying the music she had planted in their hearts. Some became professional musicians. Others simply carried the confidence and joy that music had given them into whatever paths they chose. She still performed sometimes. Special concerts for special causes, benefits for children's programs and disability organizations. She recorded a few more albums, quieter and more personal than the first. Critics said her playing had changed. It was softer now, deeper, more reflective, like someone who had found what they were looking for and no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. On the 10th anniversary of the music program, the community center held a celebration. Hundreds of current and former students gathered to play together. The room was filled with sound and vibration, with laughter and tears, with music that meant something because it came from the heart. The woman sat at the old upright piano, the same one she had discovered as a lonely 7-year-old girl. It was worn and scratched, its keys still yellow with age. But it was beautiful to her. It had always been beautiful. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. Around her, she felt the vibrations of all the other instruments, all the other students, all the other hearts beating in rhythm with hers. She had been born into silence. The world had told her that silence meant emptiness, that it meant less, that it meant broken. But she had found something in that silence, a voice that didn't need sound, a music that didn't need ears, a gift that only she could give, and she had given it. She was still giving it. She would give it for as long as she lived. The silent girl had found her song, and now she was teaching the whole world to sing.